All right, so I just want to take a minute to go over the components of the Sportshift harness. First and foremost, everything gets grounded. So all the signals, they come out of the TCU and they go into the various buttons and switches. And when they make their current through all of those, they're gonna get chassis grounded. Next, you have this right here. This is going to be what goes into your 12-volt cigarette lighter and the light bulb for the ashtray. This power wire comes off and it's going to go up here to the power hold switch. It's just an added feature for the TCU when you have Sportshift, and even some cars that don't have Sportshift over in Europe and Japan. You flick it up for power, down for hold, and that switch essentially just is changing how the TCU behaves. Next, we have connector for the actual shifting assembly. So what this is going to do is this is going to tell the TCU to send signal in order to put it into sport mode, and then it is going to either send a signal for upshift or downshift. And so that's what this connector right here is going to give you. Now, when you're in sport mode, instead of using the shifter assembly, this connector is going to go underneath to the steering wheel, and that's for the paddle shifters. So you have a ground wire, an upshift, and a downshift wire. And then lastly, forgive my heat shrink right here. The last thing is these pins which go into the TCU itself. Now, the colors don't match in with the rest of the wires. This is just a prototype. These pins are actually special pins. I wouldn't say special, but they're very specific pins. They're very small. I do have extra pins ordered, some of which have already come in, but these are going to pin into the back of the TCU. Now, the very important thing to be mindful of is that this TCU connector has a little tray across the top of it. It's kind of like a panel that goes straight down, and it looks like a grid when it slides in and out. It doesn't leave the connector completely. It just slides in or pops up about 1/8 of an inch. And you have to be able to pop that up in order to de-pin these. You also need a $70 tool in order to push these pins out, or else you will damage them. So there's very little room for error unless you own that tool, which I happen to own that tool. But you will put these into the chart that I have that shows you which slot, and you'll see they'll be empty. Almost all of the empty slots will be filled up by these pins right here. So that's how the entire thing works. It does split off or branch off somewhere where it's all wrapped up in here, but that's the harness in a nutshell. So let's take a look at the actual sport shifter assembly itself. Now, the weird thing about these sport shifter assemblies is that this is meant for a right-hand drive car. So the plus and minus is on the left side. Weird that Subaru wanted you to pull it down and push it away from you. The USDM version of this, the plus and minus is on the right side, where the driver is on the left side. Again, weird that Subaru wanted you to come down and push it away from yourself. So this is the JDM version. Also notice that instead of a little door here, the lockout to override it, it is actually a button. And normally power gets sent to this little solenoid down here and it pulls this pin back. If you push this down, it's gonna release that. So you do have that added functionality. You have a light that comes down, it goes over to this connector over here. Coming out of that connector, you also have wires for the solenoid itself down here. And then you also have 2 wires there's a position signal that goes in here that sends out to the rest of the TCU. So it's not very different. The only thing that you get added extra with having the Sportshift version is you'll actually get this connector. Now, it won't look like this. I added this connector. I swapped it out for a different type of 6-pin connector. These are all the wires that will go up to your activate sport mode, upshift, or downshift. And you actually have to push on the lever up the top. There we go. So you can go down to reverse, neutral, drive, 1, 2, 3, but then you can switch over and it essentially stays in the same drive position, but now Sportshift is activated and you go up a gear and down a gear. And you can see that the lever actually doesn't move anymore when you're in there. Now, when Sportshift is activated, there's actually a switch down in here that makes contact. It's that blue switch deep down in there. And when it gets pushed over, it's activated. Deactivated, activated. So it's pretty nice how this all works. The engineering behind it that Subaru had done is pretty clever. Very simple though. It's a really good setup, and we'll go all the way back up into park. Actually got to push the button down on the top here. There is no part number for the actual sport shifter itself. It is all one giant assembly. So there's the cover, then there's a plastic base inside of here, which is this top one. Then there's this plastic base, there's this lever. There is, the shifter is actually one of the most expensive parts of this, with all the spring in there and the button. And then the very, very bottom, this rubber base here is a whole part number. This bracket is a part number. I mean, everything, all the sensors in there, they're all part numbers. So there's no assembly part number for this as a whole. You just got to look for a used one. All right, so now let's take a look at the paddle shifter assembly. Now, there's two different versions of this. There's one that has the button sticking out the top, and then there's one that does not. And the one that does not is what I'm gonna show you in a moment. You can also see some of the levers here are meant for a right-hand drive vehicle. They're actually flip-flopped. So what I'll have to do is take the ones out of my current car, which happens to be a Forester, and put them into here. It's a very easy process. But there are special slots opened up on the side here for the paddles to stick out of. And there are also, again, two different versions of this. There's one that has the sticker with the arrows, pass, low, high, left, right. And then there's one that's actually raised lettering that has that. Now you can see here, this is key cylinder delete. It's actually really handy to have one of these if you're gonna do push button, because it mounts into there really nicely. You can also see that there's a skeleton or frame in here. That frame is specifically meant for this cover, and the paddles are up the front there. It all ties together in a very specific way. So if you were to use your stock steering column frame that's in here for everything, good chance that you're either going to have to modify it quite a bit, or you're going to be kind of out of luck on this. And then the last piece is, a lot of people that have done this in the past or have attempted to do this in the past, what they have had to do is they had to trim in this area. I don't know if I'm going to have to do that just yet, but let's open this up and take a look at what's inside. All right, so here's everything taken apart. As you can see, I grabbed my spare setup. I do have two currently, and here is the different cover. You can see the raised letters that I talked about, and you can also see that there's no cutout for the parking lights, but it's almost identical in every single way. The plastic on these feels significantly stronger than the ones that come on your standard Impreza, your standard Forester from the 03 or 02 all the way up to 07, 08 generation. So this is really nice. I'm looking forward to having something that's not as rattly on my car or thin plastic, but it does split down the side, and that's how you take it apart. Here is the skeleton that's specific for mounting the paddles. You can see you have two screws here. You'll have one at the bottom, one for holding in the cover, and then at the top here on either side right there. And then also down here, gonna keep those paddles mounted. Now, I did say that these stalks are switched or flipped because it's meant for a right-hand drive vehicle. It's very easy to take these out and put yours from the guts of your setup into the skeleton. And if you look on the side here, there's a screw that I've already removed. It's actually right there. You undo that screw and they slide right out. And so again, there's no electrical connections here except for the button at the top. That is the specific skeleton that you need. Most of the time, if you try to find these used, you can only get them with the actual levers attached to them. That's how Subaru sells it. And they become very expensive because if you look at these, there's a lot of circuitry in there. There's a lot of functionality in these, and Subaru charges a lot of money for them. I think OEM pricing on them is somewhere upwards of $300-400. There's one specific version that is closer to $500, but let's get that out of the way. And the fun part is the actual paddles. But you can see here that you can downshift, upshift, and they all come down to the bottom here to this connector. And then you have your yellow and blue wires for your downshift and upshift. So it's really, really strong setup. This one is actually brand new right out of the box. You have some nice rubberized material on the back here. This is a really fun piece to this whole setup. I'm looking forward to see how it all runs. The wires will come down from the back of this underneath the steering column and then go all the way down to essentially where the TCU meets up. They're spliced in to match with the up signal and down signal for telling the transmission when to shift.